Let me invite you to turn in a Bible to what we just read together, Psalm 126. And if you want to use one of the church Bibles, it's page 566. We've spent these summer Sundays in the collection of the Psalms that the Bible has, these poetic prayers that, among other things, have God stretching us into a deeper honesty, a wider compassion, a higher sort of gratitude. And today's Psalm, what we just read together, is another version, kind of continuing where John Harden was last Sunday, on being stretched into a higher and bigger sort of gratitude that then leads to joy. And what I want to emphasize today actually has the great gift of laughter. And so we read together, when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, another word for Jerusalem, we were like those who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter. Our mouths were filled with laughter. Our tongues with songs of joy. You know, and I was, I think I might have told this story before, but when I was in a 5th grade Sunday school class, we had a teacher, this is a class for boys, we had a teacher who was a retired missionary. And one day, believe it or not, we got in trouble because we were laughing. And we weren't laughing at her, just, you know, something hit us as funny, so we were laughing. And our Sunday school teacher very grimly said, "Boys, the Bible never says that Jesus ever laughed." And I'll tell you what, if that was her vision of Jesus, she became very Christ-like. I don't recall her ever smiling, and I think the poor lady was baptized in vinegar. Now, I'd say that particular Christ is not the Jesus of the Bible, the Son of the one true God, who, for all his strong anger appropriately at the injustice, the evil in this world, for all his deep grief over the suffering in this world, nevertheless has an even stronger and deeper joy. Scriptures are very clear about that. That God is an eternal, joyful, and I'd say infinitely laughing kind of being. God's eternal plans, says the Apostle Paul, are according to his pleasure. C.S. Lewis says that joy is the serious business of heaven. Now, some of my best laughs have actually been in places like this where we gather in Christ's name. And the thing is, if you're taking Jesus Christ seriously and therefore not ourselves so seriously, how could you not at least now and then laugh? I made a list of times I've laughed in church. Maybe some inappropriate, but mostly it's just the way things happened. Got a story from my mom, who's here. When she was a teenager, she and a friend were asked to play their flutes during a church service. And so the worship leader said, "We now will be blessed by a fluette doot." Now, there's a couple teenage girls, mind you, trying to play the flute. I've never played the flute, but I imagine when you got a bad case of the giggles, it's really hard to play a flute. I don't think that went so well, did it, Mom? You know, weddings are opportunities for laughs, sometimes very planned. Let's have a little humor in the wedding, but sometimes unplanned. My first church, I've done, 100 or more weddings, and I've never, ever seen a father who was so nervous as the dad of the bride that particular day. And so he nervously walked his daughter up the aisle, and I asked basically you start by saying, you really want to go through with this, and they say, "I do." And then comes the question to the father, "Who gives this woman to be this man's wife?" And he blurted out, "Her father and I." And he didn't hear what he said. He just sat down. His daughter heard what he said, and she kind of exploded. You know how when you're trying to contain a laugh, you snort a lot, And you just get the shoulders shaking. I'd say, Marilyn, for a good 10 minutes. The people behind her thought, "Is she having a seizure?" because most people hadn't heard that, and she's just like this, for a good 10 minutes. Now, some of you keep records of my bloopers. I'm really happy about that. So I'm not going to repeat any of those. But do you remember one Sunday several years ago where it was kind of like we just did, a song in the offering right before the sermon, and there was some kind of a light switch in this closet back here, and I noticed that the light wasn't working, so David had told me how to work this out. So I went to the closet to turn it on, and I didn't want to be a distraction, so I went in, turned on the light, and closed it. What I didn't realize was the latch was broken, and I was stuck in there. So I just knocked real loud, and Nikki Meiskens, who was then in high school, I think was sitting right about here, and she opened the door with this look like, what the, And I had the song ended right at that point. So I just walked right up to preach. I started preaching once the laughter finally died down because people hadn't always noticed, but the word was spreading. Now, look, a lot of laughs, we can tell a lot of stories like that, but a lot of laughs come because things don't go the way they're supposed to, right? And, sometimes that's tragic, obviously, but frequently it's just funny. But I didn't expect that, That wasn't part of the plan. But listen, here's part of what I want to say today from Scripture is that the capacity of the whole thing is because things happen exactly the way they're supposed to. We're supposed to laugh. It's not some quirky thing. Like my Sunday school teacher, stop that. It's more like God says, go for it. I made you for this. Has it ever occurred to you that the capacity to laugh is one way we humans are uniquely created in the image of God? Very few creatures laugh. They kind of have an imitation of a laugh. I don't know, maybe some animals, maybe the chimpanzees and monkeys, or maybe they've got a genuine kind of laughter. But I think this could be verified. It's uniquely human to see things that are funny, to have laughter because good things have happened, because things are just amusing, whatever it is. It's a unique gift of God. And the many ways we laugh, you can just hear it in this room. So you just kind of, and then some just have a roar, and it's really interesting. But the ways we laugh are one distinctive of our uniqueness that together reflects an infinite God with all his vast variety. I want to show you a very brief clip of some varieties of laughter that are just sort of embedded in human nature very, very early in life. So Hannah, would you show that clip? It's just contagious, isn't it? We're laughing mainly because kids are laughing, right? But let me suggest that's just a clue, maybe. That in of itself is a clue that most forms of laughter come from something really deep in our souls. Not just because this or that happened, but it comes deep in our souls. Something about what we are. And something about who we are. Myrna Bablavi saw the Friday email that what our focus was going to be today, so she sent me a few quotes. Here's a couple. Laughter is the sound of the soul dancing. Laughter is the fireworks of the soul. So that's how God made us. And it's His joy, as Jesus said more than a couple times, to share that with us. My joy, our joy with the Father, I give to you. And here's the thing, that the ultimate, deep, lasting laughter of God is there no matter where we are, no matter what's happening. Let's look at Psalm 126, and I want to show you a few things here and a couple other scriptures about the laughter of God that He shares and wants to share with each of us. Now, the context is not so happy. The context of this psalm is a flow of tears and long-term suffering. Probably the context is the 70-year exile of most of the Jews to distant Babylon, current-day Iraq. And in fact, one translation, as you see up on the screen, is the Lord brought back the captives. And one expression of that horrific disruption in the life of the Jews is Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion, when we remembered Jerusalem. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." But how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? Let me just say this. I believe that our deepest joy and our purest laughter is not going to authentically rise if we're not also facing the real threats and the great losses that occur in every life. Yeah, it's about honesty, isn't it? And we've seen this in so many Psalms. We've had some Sundays going through the Psalms where, we always have some laughter, but we've had some Sundays where these Psalms drew us into tears and heartache, because they became a reflection then of what many people are praying around this world. You know, the violence that's occurred in our nation and around the world this summer, and heartache that's going on in individual lives. And I'd say that if we're not facing that stuff, we're not going to have a genuine kind of joy in our lives. You know, we're in a war, aren't we, with an adversary. I mean, Christ has won, but the battles are still raging. We're in a war with an adversary who, among other things, wants to steal human joy. And one particular strategy that he has is to produce counterfeit joy. Related to what God originally invented, Satan can't create anything. All he can do is twist what God has made. So he twists forms of joy and laughter. And so, for example, laughter can be pure escape, nothing more. It's just to kind of get away from the pain. And I think I've seen plenty of interviews where, in understandable ways, a lot of famous comedians, they're a wreck inside. They have a lot of depression. And it's a way of coping. That's not all bad. It's not all bad, but it's just not the real thing, the ultimate thing that God wants to give. Proverbs 14:13 says, in laughter the heart can still ache. Some laughter can be, and here's the most twisted version of it, some laughter can be a weapon. Where maybe to deflect the pain in our life, we transmit it to others. It's called mocking. It's called ridicule. I get a good laugh because I'm putting you down. I'm glad politicians never ever do that. I say real cynically and sarcastically. That is so distant from the laughter of God. So these Psalms, they enable us, they give us words to face and express our grief, our fear, our anger, and we've got to do that. We've got to face it, but we've got to find ways where we face these things honestly, but we do so in ways that don't hurt, but actually help. And here's the primary way. We face loss and threat, but we face those things honestly, but we do it with a focus, talked about this a few weeks ago, we do it with a focus on God, a good God and his great gifts. And so verse 3 goes on, the Lord has done great things for us and we're filled with joy. This was the heart of John's really powerful message last Sunday. We focus on God, despite whatever. We intentionally look for what are the gifts that he's giving. We intentionally choose to express that in gratitude and praise. And it's not an escape from hard realities. It's placing those hard realities into an even greater reality called God. And then let him do what he wants to do with it. Verse 4 is an ongoing prayer because on the one hand, it's a picture of, wow, they've been freed from the exile, and yet, you know, this is a prayer that's for many contexts, and so in some respects, the exile and the pain, the suffering is still going on. So the prayer, verse 4, is restore our fortunes, Lord, like streams in the Negev, the barren southern wilderness of Israel. And in certain seasons, you see these I've had a chance to see this once, the refreshing streams that occasionally run through there. But would you give this, Lord, please? But the focus is not just on the dryness, the barrenness, the losses, the threats, it's being faced, but the focus is on the great things God has done in the past, and then the promises of what he will do. And so, with confidence, in this psalm, it said, those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves, carrying the abundant produce of the seed with them. Yeah, the more that we get our focus on God as he gives himself, the more seriously we will take him, and the less seriously we'll take ourselves. And let me suggest this, that the more seriously we take God, the more we need to take seriously his joy. And what I want to call today, his playful, saving surprises. And I don't mean playful in the sense that he plays with us, but in the sense that he's a joyful creator and wants to share that with us. I mean, just think of the way the Bible starts. Think of the beginning of all, where God shapes the chaos, where he then fills the emptiness with what he calls good. I think in some cases the word good is so rich in the original Hebrew. It means beautiful. I think part of it means that's hilarious. I mean, I dare you to go to the zoo and just spend a day there and not ever laugh at some of these creatures that God's made. I mean, how can you not laugh at these things? I mean, I think God just said, well, this will be interesting, you know. Genesis 1 is describing the cosmic bodies, and it's almost like a teasing little side note. Oh, and by the way, he made the stars too. I mean, what we now know are billions of galaxies full of billions of massive suns. And it's like, some of which we probably haven't yet discovered at all. And don't you think God got a little carried away? I know you serious scientists would say, well, for the Earth to be in the right orbit, it needed to have that mass. That's probably true, but I think God was just having some fun as well. Another example of surprise is if you heard about the baby boy in the Bible whose parents named him Laugh. Abraham and Sarah have a little guy in Hebrew. It's Yitzhak. We got a couple here. Now it goes by Isaac Sutton. He's probably back with the kids. Isaac Carlson, right there. When you see Isaac, just say, "How you doing, you suck?" It's kind of a cool name, isn't it? And of course, the Bible's Isaac, you read about him in Genesis, is part of a huge promise that God is making for the whole world through this one man, Abram, later to be known as Abraham. And the promise is that the 75-year-old man, you're going to have a family. You're going to have descendants. And I'm going to bless those descendants, and they will be a blessing to all nations. This is the beginning of God saving this broken world. And so 15 years goes by. There's no baby. So Abraham and his wife Sarah decide, well, look, we better get things moving here. So they engineer the promise of God, and Sarah says, just take my maid and have a baby through her, and little Ishmael is born. And God shows up, speaks to Abraham, and he blesses Ishmael. But he says, this is not the one. This is not the one. I said, you're going to have a son through Sarah. And you remember how Abraham responded, Genesis 15? He fell on his face laughing. Oh, yeah, right, sure. God said, no, this is going to happen. And another 10 years, but 10 years later, 90-year-old Sarah resigns from the senior citizens group and joins the MOPS group. Mothers of preschoolers. Here's what she says. Here's what it says in Genesis 21. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac, which literally means he laughs. He gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him, and Sarah said, I love this line, God has brought me laughter. And it wasn't the cynical laughter that she, like Abraham, had when the promise was first given, but this is a pure, cleansing, full of God laughter. God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. You know, often God's surprises, and there are a lot of them, aren't there? But often they're not too obvious, and we need the Holy Spirit to kind of open our eyes to them. You know, a wonderful workshop that we offer here from time to time. We'll do it again in November, I believe. But Roy Graham has a workshop where he teaches us to set aside some time with God and ask Him to bring to mind some positive memory. It can be done with other memories too, but you take a positive memory and you just kind of sit in that for a while and not just give God thanks for that, but then ask the question, God, back then, but also right now, is how are you present? What were you doing, and what were you saying? What would you say right now as I remember that blessing that occurred? And it's really been beneficial to a number of people as they engage with the God in Jesus known as Emmanuel, God with us. Well, last March I was on a getaway just to kind of be with God. And I felt led to do that when I was taking a long walk. And so I asked God that question, okay, what's a positive memory? Instantly, my 7 grandkids came to mind. And I tell you, these are 7 bright spots in my life. I highly recommend, well, when I first became a grandfather, I wasn't ready at all, but I adjusted rather quickly. It's pretty cool. But I sense the Spirit saying, well, let's get even more specific. And Roy coaches us along those lines. I mean, really zero in on something very concrete, very specific. And so really right away thought of 4-year-old Libby. I don't love her any more than any of the other grandkids. But one thing about Libby is that she's almost always smiling. She has moments when she's not, right? I mean, one of the funniest things about Libby is when she was maybe 2 or so, she had what we called the silent tantrum. And no noise at all, but she'd go up against the wall with kind of a pout and just slowly go down to the ground on her back. And just ignore us all. But most of the time, she's smiling. She's got this great laugh, this great giggle. And I tell you what, time and time and time again, I just look at her and I laugh. Not at her. It just joy bubbles up. So I'm thanking God for Libby. And then I hear, and I just been quiet long enough. And listen, if you get quiet long enough and you ask God to speak, obviously through the scriptures, but just in your heart as well, God is still alive. He still speaks to us. You always have to test it, but he really does. And very distinctly, I'm sure it was God say, Steve, Libby is one of my great gifts to you, my son. And I especially give her to you for the ways that you get stuck. You focus on your failings, and you slip into grief and depression. And this is one of my gifts. I thank God for that. But then I heard that voice go on. And I want you to know, my son, that the way you look at her and get laughing is the way I look at you. And then I heard this, got a sense of, you said, you're nowhere near as cute. That was real distinct. But you give me the same kind of joy. And it's an echo of what we have in the prophet Zephaniah. And could you let God give this to you today? The Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. In his love, he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. Will rejoice over you with singing. Listen, that's not just some sentimental, feel-good, happy thought. Because here's the last thing I want to say, and that's that the shared, deep laughter of God is a profound justice in this broken world. A brokenness we simply can't ignore, and the Psalms help us face it. But God wins. And like the song we sang just a bit ago, we'll be dancing over injustice. Psalm 2, along with some other psalms, gives us this picture of the last and lasting laugh of God over the powers that steal life and joy. He wins. It's not just a temporary escape. This is the way it will be forever. And that's why some of the purest and most cleansing laughter can even take place in times of great loss. Not every moment of it. It's a time to just grieve. But even in those times of loss, it's appropriate that there can be some laughter. Last Easter, our dear friend, church leader, high school principal, Steve Johnson, lost his battle with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And that night, Easter night, I was with Diane and the family and a few others, and we were in the bedroom where Steve had taken his last breath, and his body had not yet been taken, and we were just around the bedside and just grieving, a lot of tears. But then Diane suddenly said, you know, he always had a flair for the dramatic, going to be with Jesus on Easter. And through the tears, we all laughed. We all laughed. And it wasn't just an escape from the pain. Yeah, in some ways it was, but it wasn't just an escape. It certainly wasn't a cynical expression of anger. Oh yeah, way to go, God, take away my husband on Easter. This is gratitude for the kind of man Steve was, the kind of life that is now his. And oh my goodness, there's still a deep ache. There's still so many tears for Diane and her family especially that are just raw. And yet, we were with Diane just a couple days ago, and there's still laughter. And the laughter is a sign. It's a sign of the joy to come and the God who is with her and the God who's with us. I want to close with a short video clip from the Ken Burns remarkable documentary on World War II. And it's mainly about a guy who, like my father, was in the Army and captured in the Philippines, and my dad and thousands of others became prisoners of war for 3 years. So let's look at this particular story.
We've sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge and into San Francisco Bay. And as we approached the pier, there, I get a little choked up. There was the American flag, sailing, flying high in the breeze over American soil. And it was the most gratifying thing, because we never dreamed we would ever get back. And there was a bunch of prisoners of war on there. And we stood there, couldn't even say anything, with tears in our eyes. And as we docked, I was the second one to get off. And I get out on the ground, and I kissed the ground. And every one of the prisoners of war that was on that ship got off the gangplank and kissed the ground. And our audience out there was just clapping their hands every time and welcoming us home. And it was the greatest feeling in the world.
Glenn Frazier's family back in Fort Deposit, Alabama, had officially been informed that he had died in the Philippines.
We were told we could make a phone call home at the expense of the government. So I made my phone call to my home, and the phone was answered by my mother. And I told her who it was. And now I didn't know anything about all these, the letters and the guy coming there offering, telling me I was dead. So she answered the phone, and then she fainted. And the phone went dead. And then her sister was there visiting, and she fainted when I told her who it was. And then my older sister came to the phone, and she fainted. So then there was a long pause, and my daddy answered the phone. He said, "Who in the world is this?" And so I told him, and I used my middle name at home as Dowling. I said, "This is Dowling." And he said, "I knew you weren't dead." But he said, "Look like I've got a bunch of dead women." He said, "I've got to get them up off the floor." So he said, "Now you hold on, don't go away now, I'll be back in a minute." So he goes and gets a pitcher of water. He's pouring some water in their face. Come back to the phone. He said, "I think they're waking up. Their eyes are moving. Someone's moving a little bit." He said, "They'll be able to talk to you a little bit." And that's when they knew I was in San Francisco.
One translation of the psalm is, "When the Lord brought back the captives." When the Lord brought back the captives, we were like those who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. You know what the psalm, that psalm about ancient Jews, and this story about Glenn Frazier and his family, and the stories my own dad would tell about his too good to be true homecoming, and all the tears and the laughter of just pure joy, I'd say all of those are foreshadows of what God promises to every person who will simply receive what he has to offer. And that's unimaginably great joy in the presence of the risen Christ forever, stepping into the fullness of his resurrection life, stepping into his joy, stepping into his laughter, along with all that he'll have for us to do freely and fruitfully. And that destiny that is for all who trust in Jesus, that destiny was anticipated when Jesus was raised from the dead, and it was anticipated by the few who actually saw him, who were actually with him. So Luke 24 says that the disciples, when Jesus shows up in the room where they're together, they disbelieved for joy. In other words, they doubted because it was too good to be true. And so you know what Jesus does? Remember that in Luke 24? What does he do? I think it's kind of funny. He says, hey, you guys got anything to eat? And he did it to prove that he was real. He did it to share a meal with them, to share joy with them. And I'd say around that table there was laughter. He's here. He's real. He's with us. Death loses. And that laughter is just like it will be when he welcomes anyone who will receive into his presence forever. Let's pray together. Let me suggest that you just take a moment with maybe something kind of simple, a gift that God's given you that's at least a glimpse of the way things were meant to be. A taste of the goodness of God. And see if you don't have resonating in your spirit then a gratitude that this is the way it will be. Through the risen Christ, when he defeats evil, when he heals the brokenness, when he draws us into his presence. Give him your thanks and praise.